2,000 years ago, on a warm spring night in Jerusalem, a man walked into an olive garden knowing he would never walk out of it free. He had done nothing wrong. He had broken no law. He had hurt no one. Yet within hours, he would be arrested, beaten, and condemned to die. This is not a story you have heard before, not the cleaned-up version, not the Sunday morning version. This is what actually happened, in real time, in real detail, in a real garden called Gethsemane. We know the location, we know the night, we know who was there. And when you hear what really took place in those hours, you will never see this story the same way again. So turn off your screen, close your eyes if you want, and come with me back to Thursday night, 33 AD, on the slopes of the Mount of Olives, outside the walls of Jerusalem. Gethsemane. The name in Aramaic means oil press. It was not a quiet, beautiful garden the way artists have painted it for centuries. It was a working olive grove, ancient trees, twisted and thick, their roots pressing deep into the rocky hillside. By night it was dark, isolated, the kind of place where sound carries and shadows move. Jesus had been coming here regularly with his disciples. He knew this garden. He chose it deliberately, not for comfort, but because he needed to be away from the city, away from the crowds, in a place where he could pray. The garden sat just across the Kidron Valley from Jerusalem's eastern gate. If you stood at the right angle, you could see the city walls lit by the Passover fires. The Passover, that is the context that matters here. The city was packed with hundreds of thousands of pilgrims. The Romans were on high alert, and Jesus had spent the last 3 years making powerful enemies in that city. Tonight, those enemies were finally ready to move. To understand what happened in the garden, you need to understand what happened in the hours before it. Jesus and his 12 disciples had just finished the Passover meal in an upper room somewhere in the city. The meal itself had been extraordinary. Jesus had taken the bread and broken it. He had taken the wine and passed it. He had washed his disciples' feet, a servant's job, on his knees before each one of them. And then he had said something that stopped the room cold. He said that one of them, one of the 12 men sitting at that table, was about to betray him. They all looked at each other. No one could believe it. But one man at that table already knew. His name was Judas Iscariot, and at some point during the meal, he slipped away into the night. The other 11 did not yet understand where he had gone. Jesus did. He knew exactly what was about to happen, and he walked into that garden anyway. Here is something most people do not know. When Jesus entered the garden, he did not go there to be strong. He went there to break. The Gospel of Mark, written just 30 years after these events, close enough that eyewitnesses were still alive, records that Jesus became deeply distressed and troubled. He told his closest disciples, 3 of them, Peter, James, and John, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." He walked a little further ahead. He fell to the ground and he prayed. He prayed for a way out. He said, "Father, if it is possible, take this cup from me." That is not the prayer of someone perfectly at peace. That is the prayer of someone in anguish. The Gospel of Luke adds a detail that only a physician would notice. Luke was a doctor. That Jesus' sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. This is a real medical phenomenon. It is called hematidrosis. It happens under extreme psychological stress. This man was not performing, he was suffering. 3 times Jesus went to pray, and 3 times he came back to find his disciples asleep. Peter, James, John, the 3 men closest to him in the world, asleep. He had asked them for one thing, stay awake with me, watch and pray, and they could not do it. It is easy to judge them from 2,000 years away, but think about what they had been through that day. An emotionally intense Passover meal, the shock of hearing that one of them was a traitor, hours of walking through a crowded, tense city. They were full of food and wine, exhausted, and the warm night air of Jerusalem in spring had done its work. They fell asleep. Jesus did not wake them in anger the first time or the second. The third time, his voice carries something different. He says, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough. The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." And as the words left his mouth, torches appeared in the trees. This is the moment most people picture wrong. They imagine a few temple guards sneaking through the dark, but that is not what happened. What came into that garden was a crowd. The Gospel of John calls it a detachment of soldiers. The Greek word used there, spira, refers to a Roman cohort. A cohort could be anywhere from 200 to 600 men. Add to that the temple police sent by the chief priests and Pharisees, and you're looking at a large, organized, armed force entering a dark olive grove in the middle of the night. They carried torches, they carried lanterns, they carried swords and clubs. This was not a quiet arrest. This was a show of overwhelming force. Think about what that scene looked like. Hundreds of flickering orange lights pushing through ancient olive trees, the sound of armor and footsteps on rocky ground, the smell of torch smoke mixing with the night air. And standing on the other side of that light, 11 confused, frightened men and one man who was completely calm. Judas had a problem. The soldiers needed to arrest the right man. In the dark, in a grove of trees, among a group of Galilean men, they needed to be certain. So Judas arranged a signal. Whichever man he greeted with a kiss, that was Jesus. In that culture, a kiss on the cheek was a normal greeting between men, particularly from a student to his teacher. Judas walked straight toward Jesus. He called him Rabbi, teacher, and he kissed him. Jesus looked at him and said, according to Luke, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" Not with anger, not with violence, with a question. Matthew records that Jesus called him friend. Some translations say companion. Whatever word you prefer, the meaning is the same. Even in this moment, even as the man who had shared his table for 3 years handed him over to be killed, Jesus addressed him not as enemy, but as a person he still cared about. That detail alone says everything about the character of this man. Then everything happened at once. The soldiers stepped forward to seize Jesus, and one of the disciples, the Gospel of John names him as Peter, drew a sword. This is often overlooked in the story. The disciples were armed. Jesus had told them earlier that night to bring swords if they had them, and they had too. Peter drew his and swung it at the nearest man. That man's name we know, also from John's Gospel, was Malchus. He was a servant of the high priest, and Peter cut off his right ear. Think about what that means in terms of aim and intent. Peter was not trying to trim Malchus's hair. He swung at his head. He was trying to kill him. Malchus moved. The blade took his ear instead. For a brief moment, the garden was on the edge of a full, violent confrontation. 11 armed disciples, hundreds of soldiers, chaos in the dark. And then Jesus stepped forward, reached out, and touched the ear of the man who had come to arrest him, and healed it. A man came to take him prisoner. Jesus healed him first. Jesus turned to Peter and said something that changed the direction of all of human history in one sentence. "Put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put to my disposal more than 12 legions of angels?" 12 legions. A Roman legion had between 5,000 and 6,000 soldiers. 12 legions of angels, that's 72,000 by the lowest count. Jesus was saying, I have access to a force that would make this entire arresting party look like nothing, and I'm choosing not to use it. Then he said the words that explain the whole night. But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen this way? This was not helplessness. This was a choice, a deliberate, conscious, fully understood choice to walk into what was coming. He then turned to the crowd and said something remarkable. He asked them why they had come with weapons. Had he been hiding? Had he been running? No, he had been in the temple teaching every day. They could have taken him anywhere. The weapons were not for him. They were for their own fear.
Then the disciples ran, all of them. Peter, who had just drawn a sword, James and John, who had just sworn they would die with him. Every single one, gone into the dark of the olive trees. Mark's gospel includes a strange, specific detail that no other gospel mentions. A young man was following Jesus, wrapped only in a linen cloth. When the soldiers grabbed at him, he left the cloth behind and ran away naked into the night. Most scholars believe this young man was Mark himself, his way of quietly signing his own account, of saying, I was there, I saw this. If that is true, it is one of the most intimate details in the entire New Testament, an eyewitness moment preserved because someone thought it was worth remembering. The olive grove was suddenly quiet again. The torches were gathered. The soldiers had what they came for. And Jesus, bound, surrounded, entirely alone now, was led back down the hillside toward Jerusalem. None of his friends were walking beside him, not one. The journey from the Garden of Gethsemane back into Jerusalem was not long in distance, perhaps half a mile, down the hillside, across the Kidron Valley, through the city gate. But in every other sense, it was the longest walk in the story. Jesus was bound. The soldiers and temple police surrounded him. The crowd that had come with weapons and torches was now a procession moving through the sleeping city. Most of Jerusalem was asleep. The Passover feast was over. The streets were quiet. Only a few people would have seen this group moving through the dark, a prisoner in the middle, armed men on all sides. He was taken first to Annas, the former high priest, father-in-law of the current high priest Caiaphas. This is important. Annas still held enormous influence even out of office. Taking Jesus to him first was not procedure, it was politics. Annas wanted to look at this man who had been causing so much trouble. He wanted to see him in chains. And somewhere in the city, following at a distance, trying not to be seen, was Peter. The other disciples had run. Peter ran too at first, but then he stopped and he turned around. He followed the procession back into the city at a distance. He managed to get into the courtyard of the high priest's house, possibly because another disciple, whom John describes simply as the other disciple, was known to the high priest and vouched for him at the gate. And Peter stood in that courtyard, warming himself by a fire in the cold night air, trying to look like he belonged there. A servant girl looked at him. She said, "You also were with Jesus of Galilee." Peter denied it. Later, someone else said the same thing. Peter denied it again. And the third time, someone pointed out that his accent, the way he spoke, gave him away as a Galilean. And Peter swore with an oath that he did not know the man. At that exact moment, from somewhere across the courtyard, a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered. Jesus had told him just hours earlier, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." Peter went outside, and he wept bitterly. What happened next in the house of Caiaphas was, by every standard of Jewish law at the time, completely illegal. Jewish law required that capital trials be held during the day. Jewish law required that a verdict of death could not be reached on the same day as the trial. A night must pass for reflection. Jewish law required that witnesses be examined separately. None of this happened. The Sanhedrin, the religious council, assembled in the middle of the night in the high priest's house rather than in the proper court chamber. Witnesses were brought in who gave contradictory testimony. The whole proceeding was a formality. The decision had already been made. They needed a charge that would satisfy Roman law, because only Rome could execute someone. So they settled on one: blasphemy. Jesus, they said, had claimed to be the Son of God. Before the high priest, asked directly whether he was the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One, Jesus gave the answer that sealed his fate. He said, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One." The room erupted. Caiaphas tore his robes. The verdict was unanimous. He deserved death. Step back for a moment from the drama and the detail. Look at what actually happened in that garden and in those hours. A man who could have escaped didn't. A man who could have fought stopped the fight. A man who could have called for supernatural rescue chose not to. He healed the ear of someone who came to arrest him. He called his betrayer friend. He asked not why they had come with swords, but why they hadn't simply come to him in the open. Every action in this story points in the same direction. This was not a man caught off guard by fate. This was a man who understood exactly what was happening and walked into it with open eyes. The disciples who ran were not cowards in any ordinary sense. They were human beings responding to a terrifying situation in a completely human way. The miracle is not that they ran. The miracle is that Jesus didn't. He had prayed for another way. He had sweat drops of blood asking for a different path. And then he stood up, walked out to meet the torches, and said, "Here I am." Here is the thing that still takes my breath away when I think about it. The Garden of Gethsemane still exists. You can go there today. You can walk among the olive trees on the slope of the Mount of Olives just outside the old city of Jerusalem. Some of the trees that are standing there right now have been carbon dated to be over 900 years old. They are not the same trees from that night. Those were cut down centuries ago. But the roots, some scientists believe the roots of certain trees in that garden may connect to root systems that were alive in the 1st century. The ground where Jesus knelt and prayed may still be under your feet when you stand there. Millions of people have stood in that garden and tried to feel what that night was like. And maybe that is the point. Every generation that has ever lived has had its own garden, its own dark night, its own moment of asking, is there another way? And finding, somehow, the strength to stand up anyway. The story of Gethsemane is 2,000 years old, but the question it asks is from last night and tonight and every night that follows.